For those of you know who don't know me, I'm Neeraj Jha. I'm the Associate Director for Education at the Andlinger Center, and I'm also on the faculty at Electrical Engineering. So we kick off this session with a talk by Mr. Richard Kauffman. Mr. Kauffman is the energy czar of New York State and heads this initiative called Reforming the Energy Vision Initiative. Directly reports to Governor Cuomo, and the initiative has about $5 billion over the next 10 years in a clean energy fund. And the aim of this fund is to, by year 2030, have half of the electricity of New York generated through renewables, and also reduce the carbon footprint by about 40%. So there are many authorities that Mr. Kauffman supervises in New York, and just to give you some examples, it's Department of Public Service, New York Power Authority, Long Island Power Authority, New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. And his degrees are from Stanford and Yale, and he was the chief delegate from New York to the Paris Climate Change Conference, and Fortune magazine calls him one of the top 25 eco-innovators in the world. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Kauffman.
Well, good morning. Thank you very much, Professor Jha. Thank you all for having me here. I feel a little connection to the Andlinger Center, thanks to Dean Carter. And it's really, the work that you do here is really, really important to the world. And I hope that in the few things that I say, there'll be areas for future collaboration between the center and policy. So I know in the last day, you've had the opportunity to listen to a whole range of new technology solutions. And I think just generally, we feel intuitively, even for people that aren't energy experts, that we've got a lot of great technology around in the United States and around the world that could really make a difference, that could change the world. And for those that are also thinking about economic development, we also have the intuition that, boy, couldn't we make this stuff here in the United States and create more jobs? But somehow, I think intuitively, it feels that there's a gap between this technology and market acceptance. There's some kind of hang-up in between. So some of the barriers to adoption are, of course, costs. And they're real, but I think overstated in many cases. And some of the barriers to adoption are financing. And again, these are real, but I think overstated. Some of the barriers to adoption are softer, that companies have difficulty finding the customer. And I can think of a couple of examples. Before I went into government, I was the head of an investment firm that invested in clean technologies called Good Energies. And we invested in a company that had a solid state valve that went into air conditioning and refrigeration. And it offered a 20% improvement, which is a big number in air conditioning and refrigeration. And it could be retrofitted, and the OEMs even said that they wouldn't void the warranty. So really had everything going for it. So if you're a small company, where do you go to sell your product if you're trying to sell air conditioning and refrigeration solutions? You go to companies that use a lot of refrigeration and air conditioning. So this company went to the big retailers. And the company didn't make it. Why didn't the company make it? Well, who did you go to at a grocery store chain? Well, you know, they had an energy person, they had a facilities manager, and the risk of the person that would be the ultimate buyer was asymmetric, because if things didn't work, the person would be fired from their job. So sure, we'll take a couple of these devices and we'll test it, but it would take years and years to sell enough of these devices to have the company be successful. And last week, I met with a company that makes an LED tube that is a retrofit for a fluorescent tube. So 95% cost savings, just screws right into the existing fixture. Another great technology solution. Having a lot of difficulty getting to market. Why are they having difficulty getting to market? Well, the distribution channel, they don't know anything about this kind of product. And so the challenge is to go through this existing conservative channel. So they came to us and said, well, you know, we're thinking about going to the subway system because the subway system uses a lot of fluorescent tubes. And this would save a lot of money, not only in terms of energy, but in terms of maintenance. And we're having difficulty there. So we talked a little bit further. And it turned out, well, this issue of saving maintenance costs would mean, how did the union workers feel about having less work to do? So these are soft but very real market barriers. So all these market barriers to market adoption increase the time to market, and they can kill a small company that has an innovative solution and even retard investments by bigger companies if the economic prize is too far away. But there are two other barriers to clean energy commercial deployment that I want to talk about today, and I want to talk about how New York State is well underway in removing them. So the first of these barriers is the utility business model and how government regulations and policies that have helped create that business model and how these policies need to change. And second barrier, ironically, are government policies that have been used to support clean energy deployment. So to be clear, government policy and utilities have been effective for decades in building a complex electricity system that's delivered low-cost, reliable power on a universal basis. So it's really worked great in the past. And government support policies have achieved some progress in renewables, but we cannot achieve scale in doing what we have been doing. So business as usual needs to change. So I was working in Washington for the Secretary of Energy, and I got a call from the governor of New York right after Sandy. And the governor had been with a lot of New Yorkers in the cold and in the dark, and he said to me, utilities are vinyl records in the age of the iPad. And he wasn't just talking about resiliency. He was also talking about the increasing costs from traditional ways of producing and distributing electricity. He was also talking about changing customer and community preferences, because more and more individuals and communities want to have more control over their energy. The governor was also talking about the need to create economic opportunity that will come from a transition to a clean energy system. So the governor has a plan. We have a plan that we're implementing called REV, Reforming the Energy Vision, and it's designed to do exactly that, to build a system that's more affordable, more resilient, and gives customers more choice and value, and it will create more economic opportunity, and it will reduce emissions. Part of REV is the governor's mandate for 50% renewables by 2030, and so I've been asked many times, well, how are we going to achieve 50% renewables by 2030 on a cost-effective basis? And the good news, and it really is good news, the good news is that the current power system is not only energy inefficient, and we know that when you think about a power plant where sometimes half the energy content goes up the chimney in the form of waste heat, it is financially inefficient. So I'm going to say this again. The current system is not only energy inefficient, it is financially inefficient. And because the current system is energy and financially inefficient, we can use the cost envelope of the system to build a new system, the new system that is cheaper and cleaner. And I'm going to give you two quick examples to show you how this new system can be cheaper and cleaner. So when we think about a hot summer day, the system is built for those peak few hours or days of the year. And the system is built so that in theory, all your appliances can go on at the same moment. Now, it's not built literally so that they can all go on at the same moment, but statistically, a lot of appliances go on at the same moment. Now, it doesn't have to be that way. We know we can have chips and devices to control the load, and they could cycle on and off. We wouldn't even know the difference. And it's very expensive to deliver peak power, and sometimes it can be the dirtiest power that's produced. So if we did have this kind of system where we could manage load better, the result would be cheaper and cleaner. Now, another example we've heard many times is about the intermittency of renewables. The wind doesn't blow all the time. And so the way the system is built now is we have fossil fuel generation as backup. But I want you to think about how intermittent resources can be paired with what happens on the demand side. And it means we don't need all that fossil fuel backup and accommodate even more renewables. And that's another example of how the system can be cheaper and cleaner. So we can achieve our objectives by driving capital to build the system of tomorrow by focusing on these two policy changes: regulatory change and public investment in clean energy. And that's, again, what I want to go into a little bit more depth. So the two examples that I've given require a different kind of physical grid. And we need to stop rebuilding the system of Tesla and Westinghouse, where electrons flow in one direction based upon fixed demand, which is really the equivalent of the mainframe in IT terms. And we need to stop bolting on renewables and distributed energy resources like solar and fuel cells onto a system that was never designed for this purpose. And that's what we are doing today. We have a grid, a physical grid, that we're trying to ask to do things it was never designed for. And what we need to start doing is to build a new modern system where electrons flow in more than one direction and supply and demand are dynamic, where variations in solar and wind are matched with what happens on the demand side, and it will combine the cost and reliability of traditional generation and distribution with the flexibility and innovation of distributed solutions. And after all, that is what our IT system is like today. It has the mainframe, but it has the innovation and flexibility of personal devices. So the question is, why aren't we building that system of tomorrow, which we've seen pictures of many times, that integrated hybrid grid? Now, there are certainly technology challenges, and I leave that to people in this room, but from our standpoint, we think that it's probably more about policy regime and regulations more than inherent technology challenges. Because just in the same way that the power grid was not designed to do what we've been asking it to do, the policy regime is also not designed to what we've been asking it to do. The policy regime was designed to build the old system, and there's not been, until now, a policy regime designed to build the new system. So if we want a different kind of grid, we need different policies. So, again, on the regulatory front, the current system is not only energy inefficient, but financially inefficient. So that's the third or the fourth time I've said it. So I'm going to give you a few examples of what I mean. So the first example is the electricity system in New York State has an average capacity utilization of 54%. It's built, as I said before, for the hottest days of the year, but we pay for it all year long. Now, a lot of capital is tied up in that system. When you look at innovation in other capital-intensive industries that have gone on in the last 35 years, leading companies have significantly improved their average capacity utilization. They've had to do that in order to remain globally competitive. And they've done this through new business models, adoption of new technologies, and new financial incentives. But that has not been the case in the utility sector. And this is not a fault of the utilities. It's a fault of the regulatory system where compensation, how utilities get paid, is based in the past on the quantity of capital that they deploy, not the efficiency of capital. And that might have made a lot of sense when you're trying to build out a system in the early 20th century, but it does not make sense today. So we can't be surprised that we have a system that's capital inefficient if we compensate companies for deploying capital. And we also can't be surprised that utilities haven't been as aggressive in making investments in software and technology as in other industries. Software is not a capital expenditure, so there's no profit opportunity to speak of for utilities to make that investment. So if you think about the remarkable improvement in productivity in every other industry that's come through the adoption of IT, the fact that there hasn't been a financial incentive for utilities to do that gives you a flavor of the inefficiency of the system, or put it more positively, the opportunity for significant improvement. Now, the second example of financial inefficiency is utility profits are about 7% of a typical customer's bill. The rest of the bill, 93%, is a pass-through. So in other businesses, 93% would be thought of as a wallet share to go after, where a company could say, I can reduce costs or improve value to my customers and earn some of that myself. That's not available up till now for utilities. So again, this is not a criticism of utilities. It's a relic of past policies that need reform. And the last example, and if I haven't made it enough already about financial inefficiency and the nature of the regulatory compact, is let's look at research and development. So on average, across the U.S., companies spend about 5% of sales on R&D. And in technology-related businesses, that number is between 10 and 20% of sales on R&D. Utilities spend, get this, 0.2% on R&D. Now, this is not because there are no opportunities. It's not because they're opposed to doing it. It's because they have no opportunity to earn from making investments in R&D because there's no regulatory incentive for doing so. So, the utility industry stands in stark contrast to every other industry that's had to compete over the last 35 years in a global economy, because other industries have had to have had an intense focus on capital efficiency to remain competitive and on costs, and instead the utility sector, utilities are paid for the amount of capital that they deploy, and they can pass along all their costs to customers. So, it said that the system is not only energy but capital inefficient. I've got to add more, because on top of all that inefficiency, government plays a role, because government now adds to customers an additional charge to support clean energy projects that are, again, bolted onto a grid that was never designed for them and bolted onto a policy regime that was also not designed for them. And so customers are really paying kind of twice for the same thing. So under REV, we're changing the rules to give utilities financial incentive to do things differently. So I'll give you, again, a couple of examples. The first is in Brooklyn and Queens is an area of load growth. And so under the old way of thinking, Con Ed, who's a local utility, would have spent close to $1.5 billion on a new substation. And probably the average capacity utilization of that substation would be probably about 54%. So instead, what Con Ed did, because of our new policies, was to do something very different. Instead of going out and procuring this solution that the utility knew that was the right thing to do, the utility instead went to the market with the problem of load growth and provided information to market participants about conditions in that location on the grid, and waited to see what the market would come back with alternative solutions to the big substation. And Con Ed was surprised by the range of solutions that came back from the market. And so the answer, instead of $1.5 billion substation, is combined heat and power, storage, energy efficiency, demand response, and solar. And this solution, instead of costing $1.5 billion, is going to cost $200 million. So all customers will save money from less capital being deployed. There'll be less peak power purchased, which will save all customers money, and it will have lower carbon emissions. So we know that this can work. We just need to do it more often every time a utility commits meaningful amounts of capital in grid-constrained areas. Because you can imagine delivering power into New York City is a grid constraint, and there are lots of grid constraints in the state. And by the way, we don't call them grid constraints. We call them grid opportunity zones, because nobody wants to live in an area of grid constraint. Everybody would rather live in an area of grid opportunity. But every state, every utility has areas of grid opportunity. And under our new policies, deployment of distributed solutions in these locations will be good not just for those customers, but good for all customers. And this is at the root of the net metering battle in the Southwest and around the country. The concern that distributed solutions may be good for solar customers, but not good for all customers. But if you deploy distributed solutions in certain locations, they are good not only for the customers that use those distributed solutions, but result in reduced costs for everybody. And deploying distributed solutions in these areas of grid constraint create a pool of cost savings. Think about that 93% that's otherwise a pass-through that can be shared between customers that use distributed energy resources, all customers, and the utilities. So utilities now have a financial incentive to reduce customer costs and get paid for doing it. Utilities now have a financial incentive to help deploy distributed resources in certain locations where these solutions are cheaper than building traditional infrastructure. Utilities now have a financial incentive to work in partnership with solar and other distributed energy providers rather than at loggerheads. Utilities will now have a financial incentive to invest in IT and storage and other innovative solutions if it helps to reduce overall customer costs. This isn't that hard to see the solution. And you can see how we can develop markets of scale for innovative clean energy products. Now, the second example that I want to talk about is reforming government programs. So in New York State, 70% of the houses are more than 70 years old. So you'd say, well, there ought to be ample opportunity for energy efficiency. And so what we will do is we will pay for somebody to come to your house and do an audit. And depending on your income, up to 100% for the cost of the retrofit. Now, when I say we pay, it's not coming from tax dollars, it's coming from customer bills. It's that extra charge added on top of a system that's already financially inefficient. At the current rate of penetration, it will take 500 years to retrofit the housing stock of New York State. And there are dozens of other programs that are like this, that either the state administers or utilities administer. I think people have heard of demand response. Demand response is not a business for a utility. It's a matter of regulatory compliance. If you happen to ride the New York City subway and you see Con Ed advertising rebates for appliances, this is not coming from Con Ed shareholders, that advertising. That advertising is being paid for by us on our electricity bills. And those grants and rebates, they're also coming from customer bills. And it's great for Con Ed, good advertising. It helps them when they go to their next rate case, they bought all this goodwill. And I'm sure that the rebates that are provided do have some positive value, but they're not creating scale, and it's not a business. Or maybe turn it the other way around. Because it's not a business, it's not creating scale. So one of the demonstration projects that we have going on, and we have several of them, to test new business models, and we call them demonstrations because they're not, as opposed to pilots, because if they work, they're going to be rolled out across the state, is turning residential energy efficiency into a business, amazingly. So in this particular demonstration, there's an energy efficiency company called Sealed, is marketing their service to residential customers 3 ways: through comfort, and second, you don't have to put any money down, and third, you get guaranteed savings. So that's a pretty good combination, and it's working in the market with customers. So the nice thing about this approach is that as a business, it's scalable. This little company, Sealed, is making money. Many more customers have more comfortable and energy-efficient homes, and utilities are earning a share of the savings as well. So utilities are also making money doing this. So if residential energy efficiency turns out to be a business, not only will we create more energy efficiency, we don't have to add to customer bills to fund a program. So I hope you have a flavor of how changes in policy in New York State will remove those barriers that stand in the way of clean technology coming to markets. And it creates that virtuous cycle that we've been looking for, because more scale means lower cost means more scale, and so forth. Now, getting all this to work requires a change in business model, culture, and attitudes, really in all parties. It requires a change in a system of systems. Because utilities, for example, this is a different business model. Their whole business model has been about spending capital, and now we're saying to utilities, you're going to have a different business model. There's still plenty of opportunities to commit capital, but if you want to maximize your returns, you have to think about saving customers money and earning a share of savings. It means that you have to start viewing the solar companies and other distributed energy providers as partners and customers, as opposed to the enemy. So that's a big change for the utility industry. And for the third-party service providers, the solar companies and others, their business model and culture needs to change as well, because they also have to view utilities as customers and partners as opposed to the enemy. Because after all, utilities have the obligation to serve, and solar companies and others don't. And so they have to not just think about what's good for the customer side of the meter, they have to think about what's good in terms of location for deployment of distributed resources where it's good for everybody. And many companies that are in the innovative energy business have been relying upon grants for their business. But if we already have a capital inefficient system, we shouldn't have to be thinking about grants. We should be thinking about using that existing customer bill to help finance the projects. So that means a change in the business model and culture and attitude of those companies too. But when we look at government, it needs to change as well. Because government is, we love to give out grants. We love to give out grants to fund projects. But if you fund a project, you just funded a project. You haven't created a market. And part of what we're doing is to try to figure out how to be more effective in using government grants to stimulate markets as opposed to just fund projects. You can look at the Solarize program as a really good example. We didn't invent it in New York, where you get tremendous value for money by just organizing a community to buy solar, as opposed to just giving grants for solar projects here and there across the state. So Judge Brandeis talked about states being the laboratory of democracy. And that's really the good thing that's happening now. Absent federal leadership, states are carrying on with different approaches to energy policy. And REV has gotten national attention. In Paris, as we know, there was a lot of attention paid to sub-national actors for implementation. And so it's a great brand, so New York is a sub-national actor. And so I think if we can demonstrate that it's possible to remove the barriers to greater adoption of innovative energy technology and create scale in New York State, others will notice. But we really need your help, because we're trying to change a system of systems. And so we have to have everything from technology to changes in culture, and we would be very grateful for your engagement. Thank you. So,
we have time for questions, so if I could just ask you to wait for the mic and perhaps introduce yourself before you ask the question.
Thank you. Oh, okay. Hi, Richard, and thanks. Great talk. I don't actually have a question. I wanted to tell you something that I think should make you proud.
Okay.
I'm Lyle Rawlings with the Mid-Atlantic Solar Energy Industries Association, where I serve as president. And we are about to issue a report at the request of our Senate Energy and Environment Committee. And the report is a report about your New York Sun program, and in particular the megawatt block program that incentivizes solar. And it's about to issue in just a few days. And the conclusion of the report is that your program is exceeding expectations. It's building solar faster than it was designed to, and it's doing so at 1/10 of the cost that our incentive system in New Jersey is doing it. So talking about change, one message from New Jersey is keep doing what you're doing.
Okay. Thank you.
We believe that it's probably the most cost-effective system for incentivizing solar anywhere in the eastern United States. And we think that REV as a whole is very, very smart. It's definitely smarter than what we're doing, and we're trying to get the attention of legislators and the government here to adopt a lot of the ideas that you've been implementing. So thanks for...
That's very nice. Thank you. So maybe I could just, if it's okay, just to elaborate a little bit, because I think it gives a couple of examples of thinking. So New York, like a lot of states, had support programs for solar, and we'd allocate a certain amount of money every year for a grant for solar. So what would happen is, August, September, October, we'd run out of money. So, okay, so you're in the solar business and you're meeting with somebody on a Friday, and Monday, well, sorry, no more money. All right, it's, stop, start. So the New York Sun program created a 10-year window for support for solar. But the interesting thing is that the support stepped down based upon volume. And the thinking behind that was that the more the industry could scale up to achieve that volume, it meant that they would lower costs, because as we know, more than half the cost of solar is what are called the soft costs. In other words, not the cost of the panels, their cost of installation and customer origination and so forth. So if the industry would make an investment to build out an infrastructure to lower soft costs, the industry would require less subsidy. And that's what's been at the root. It's in the industry's control. The industry built out to try to capture as much of the higher support, but then stepping down over time. So we thought, well, it would take close to 10 years to get the industry off public support. On Long Island, it's already off public support already, and just within 3 years. So it's an example where a state can't control hard costs. We can't control the amount of cost of solar panels or wind turbines, but a state can make a big influence in reduction of soft costs of customer origination or cost of financing. And just the other point on net metering, because I mentioned it, the solar industry and the utilities together came up with a proposal of a successor to net metering in the state. So we're not going to be Nevada. And the reason and the idea is to migrate net metering to a more locational pricing. And location really matters in where solar is deployed.
I'm Bob Paris. Your 70%, I think you said 70% of the housing stock was more than 70 years old.
In New York.
Probably about what it is in Trenton, New Jersey. A special problem in Trenton in weatherization is that a lot of the low-income housing
Right.
stock is owned by landlords.
Right.
And so I wonder how you're dealing with the lack of incentive that a landlord has in improving the energy efficiency of the housing stock.
Okay, so that's a great question. There are a couple things that we're doing and thinking about, but I want to talk in general about low income. I want to say a few things. So first, I talked a lot about markets. So markets are not going to be a solution to everything. But one of the things the government has done, particularly when we talk about low-income communities, is there are quite a number of low-income communities where there can be a market-based solution, and through government actions of giving out grants, we wind up preventing those markets from developing. And so we have, so if we're going to really, and we are not going to be able to achieve our climate objectives if we don't deal with low-income customers. We're simply not going to do it. So we have more than 1 million people in the state of New York State that are having difficulty paying their electricity bills. So this is a big issue. So we have to be thoughtful about how we do it. So part of the answer is those solutions that can be solved by a market-based solution, we want to do that, and those that cannot need a different approach as opposed to just mushing it all together. So when I say how can the state enable a market-based solution for low-income customers? Well, it may be, for example, that there needs to be some credit enhancement because these are customers that we actually think could pay their bills, but with traditional financing institutions that starve for capital. We can do that. We can do that. We can, if you think about customer origination costs, this is just an idea, because when we think about residential energy efficiency, it's really expensive to have to originate projects. Well, why don't we have instead of trying to use these grants, let's give the grants to community group. We gave $50 to a community group for a certain number of projects. My guess is that churches and other community groups would do a really good job of being able to do that. So we could do things to significantly increase the number of projects and lower the customer acquisition costs. That's something else that we're going to do, or could do. I think that we might think about permitting utilities to rate base investments that would be made in all things in the house that would improve the energy efficiency in that house. And we might find, and that would deal with some of the landlord-related issues because it would improve the house. But again, if you think about it in the context of a grid-constrained area, it may be that doing a retrofit in those locations with load-control devices and things like that could actually provide enough cost benefits to the system as a whole that it wouldn't really cost the whole system very much at all, particularly when you think about customer charges. Customer charges, the unpaid bills, everybody pays for. So when you look at the total cost of what's being imposed on the system, it may be that we can do a lot more for low-income customers and have it maybe even wind up creating value, or certainly not having it cost the system very much. But it involves thinking about it in a different way.
Rob Socolow, Princeton. Two questions that are both short. One is that New Jersey has a system for solar where you cannot be a net producer over a year, which in a way subsidizes the inefficient customer for the allocation of the subsidy for deploying solar in the first place, both residential and commercial. I wonder if New York has the same rule and whether it's problematic. Second question is about the commercial sector. I haven't said much about it. It's an enormous user of electricity, very inefficient. And are there outreach plans, incentive plans, to move move that through? Because there people are paying their own bills. They're a significant fraction of costs. There's somebody maybe at a level who can make a decision based on your policy that would actually change the system. Are you moving along in that direction as well?
Okay, so a couple things. I don't know the answer to your first question. I'm not surprised you were going to ask me challenging questions. And with respect to the second, I mean, I think there are lots of ways to think about the commercial thing, the commercial sector. So the interesting thing about the commercial sector is there are some number of commercial customers, for example, that would want to have their own combined heat and power, their own fuel cell solution. Right now, standby charges make those installations uneconomic in many cases. And the reason why customers would want that is it would be cheaper. In some cases, the power quality would be better, right? If it's a fuel cell, they're getting DC and they're spending all this money on, protecting their electronics and things like that. So if they get DC, that might be better they could save the company more money. But if you have the utilities imposing standby charges, then, as I say, the economics change. Well, again, under our plan here, where utilities are now compensated for cost savings for customers, it may be that in certain locations, a localized power plant that a commercial customer can deploy can actually reduce costs for the system as a whole. It can provide services to the grid. And in that case, not only do the standby charges go away, but there can be value that can be transferred. So it will incent, we want to incent, location matters, as I already said. We want to, part of, when we think about that grid of the future, the hybrid grid, they're distributed solutions and still the central station, production distribution system. We want to create price signals so that the distributed solutions are built in locations of the grid where those distributed solutions are going to have the most value. And so there are going to be some number of commercial customers where that's going to be the case.
Let's have one final question.
Ted Koppel wrote a book called Lights Out, and in this book he believes that there are 3 power grids in the United States, and the equipment is really old, and it would be easy for a country to hack into. And if this happens, it will send us back into the dark ages of the 1800s. I just wonder if you have any comment about something like this.
Well, I'm not, I'm not really expert in cyber things, topics, but my colleagues tell me that there's that there can be significant benefits to more distributed solutions. And maybe what I would say is that broadly, because I talked about one of the things that needs to change, and this is an area where I think you could all help us in thinking this through, is that the current system is built in a very deterministic way. And it's been engineered in a way so that there's a lot of redundancy. That's one of the reasons why it has low average capacity utilization. And so it's in that way kind of more like the wireline telephony system. And the new system needs to be more, when I use the IT analogy, it does need to be more probabilistic. As we add more and more distributed solutions, there has to be the ability to have it be more flexible. And we need to have systems which are more, and planning, which is more stochastic than deterministic. And that's not something that the industry has really thought very much about. But that would, I think when we look at other sectors of the economy that are more flexible and more resilient, they have that kind of underlying stochastic and less deterministic structure. And that's something that we have not spent much time really thinking about.
Let's thank Mr. Kauffman.